Napoleon Bonaparte, 5'2", 1769-1821. Often called the human god of war, Napoleon is one of the most famous names in world history. Before we start the story, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell button to receive all the new. Brilliant military strategist, ambitious leader, stubborn conqueror, controversial reformer. There's no denying that Napoleon left an undeniable mark on Europe and the course of world history. But who was Napoleon, and how did he rise and fall as the human god of war? Scene 2. A young prodigy. Napoleon was born in the French island territory of Corsica in 1769. He was born into an impoverished noble family. His father wanted him to be a lawyer and had him tutored privately. But it wasn't long before Napoleon's exceptional intellect and sharp ambitions became obvious. So when he was only 11 years old, he was sent to military school in mainland France. After graduating top of his class, he joined the French artillery and was soon promoted for his tactical skills and battle strategies. In 1785, when the American War with the British was raging, Napoleon traveled to North America, hoping to join the Americans and learn more about strategy firsthand. However, he returned to France without having seen any action, and he would never get the chance to fight the Americans. Instead, it wasn't long before he found himself smack in the middle of another conflict. This time back home, the French Revolution had begun. And like so many of his contemporaries, Napoleon initially supported the revolution, particularly as it opened up the ranks of the military to men based on talent rather than social status. Scene 3. A general at 25. Now, if you're familiar with the history of the French Revolution, then you may be asking yourself, how could Napoleon have become a general? Didn't the revolutionaries abolish nobility and the monarchy? Well, yes, but the revolutionary government was not exactly a beacon of democracy and egalitarianism. And so those who were skilled in the art of war, and even more skilled at navigating the treacherous waters of revolutionary politics, tended to do quite well for themselves. Napoleon, who had married the daughter of a wealthy family, was perfectly positioned to take advantage of this situation. He quickly made a name for himself by putting down revolts in the French provinces of Brittany and Lyon, and successfully defending the island of Corsica against the Sardinian invasion. It was also Napoleon who was put in charge of saving the city of Genoa, which had fallen under siege by the British and the Sardinians. He raised an army of 40,000 men and surprised his enemies by crossing the Alps with them. By the time his troops reached the plains of northern Italy, they numbered close to 100,000. They met the Austrians, Sardinians, and British in a series of battles that saw Napoleon outmaneuver and outperform his enemies. Eventually, the Allies retreated, leaving Napoleon victorious. This made him a national hero and launched his political career. Within 2 years, at the age of only 25, he had become a general, a sign of his unmatched strategic mind and bold ambition. By 1796, he was placed in command of the French campaign in Italy. Again, he astonished his enemies. First, he campaigned against the Austrians, defeating them again and again. Then he turned to the British and defeated them as well. To see Napoleon campaigning in Italy was an astonishing sight. According to one British officer, "I never witnessed anything in the whole course of the war that gave a fuller scope to imagination than the career of Bonaparte. Every day he was doing something which nothing but his genius could have produced. His victories brought him fame and fortune. Most important of all, it brought him power." Scene 4. The rise to power. After his Italian campaign, Napoleon returned to France a hero. But the Directory, the group of 5 men that had seized control after Robespierre's fall and who were now running France, didn't like his growing popularity. They sent him off to a minor post in the army in the hopes of getting rid of him. But within a year, the Directory was overthrown and Napoleon was recalled, soon after he took control of France. Now, some people might say that Napoleon was a dictator who brutally suppressed his opponents, and that's true. But it should be said that the alternative to Napoleon was likely much worse. The Directory was corrupt, ineffective, and unpopular. France needed a strong leader, and Napoleon was undoubtedly that. His rise to power came in the midst of what was known as the period of the French Revolution, known as the Thermidorian reaction, in which the radicalism of the early years of the revolution had been tempered by more moderate and pragmatic attitudes. But although he was a child of the revolution, Napoleon wasn't a Democrat. As he himself once said, Liberty is a beautiful thing, but order and discipline are also beautiful things. And while he would uphold many of the freedoms won by the French Revolution, he would just as swiftly squash any opposition against his regime. Scene 5. The Civil Code. One of Napoleon's greatest legacies is the Civil Code that he established in 1804, which dramatically reshaped European law. The Napoleonic Code guaranteed certain freedoms, including freedom of religion, speech, and the press. It also introduced significant legal reforms, such as the abolition of feudalism and the introduction of a uniform system of laws throughout France. The code was influential far beyond France's borders, shaping legal systems across Europe and inspiring later revolutions. But as you can probably guess, the reforms alone did not bring stability to France. The best way to ensure order and discipline, as Napoleon saw it, was to crown himself king. And so in 1804, Napoleon crowned himself Emperor of the French. This marked the end of the French Revolution and the beginning of the Napoleonic era. Scene 6, Emperor of France. Once he had consolidated his power at home, Napoleon set his sights on Europe. Between 1805 and 1812, Napoleon waged a series of wars that resulted in him conquering much of the continent and ruling over a vast empire that stretched from Spain to Russia. Napoleon's armies were renowned for their discipline, efficiency, and strategic brilliance. Under his leadership, France became a dominant force in Europe, shaping the political landscape of the continent for years to come. As he swept across Europe, he abolished feudalism wherever he went and replaced it with elected parliaments. Wherever he went, he introduced legal codes similar to the one he had created in France. He was even open to religious tolerance. In one instance, he famously restored the Polish death when he learned that the residents of a town had been forced to choose between Christianity and death. "Is it possible," he exclaimed, "that in this day and age, men can be persecuted for their faith?" But make no mistake, despite his reforms, he ruled as a dictator. If anyone opposed him or his reforms, they would find themselves exiled or dead. The real driving forces behind Napoleon's conquests were his own ego and his dream of total dominance. Scene 8, the downfall. Although Napoleon's record was impressive, it wasn't invincible. His downfall began with one fatal error: invading Russia. In 1812, Napoleon decided to invade Russia. With an army of 600,000 troops, it was the largest military force ever assembled up until that point. But Napoleon's advance was slowed at every turn. The Russians fought back fiercely, and the cold and snowy weather proved to be a huge challenge for the unprepared French troops. The Grand Army, as it was called, got bogged down in Russia and eventually began to disintegrate. Disease, hunger, and exhaustion ravaged the troops. And by the time Napoleon's army retreated from Russia, only a few thousand soldiers remained. The disastrous Russian campaign weakened Napoleon's empire. Other European powers, sensing his vulnerability, began to unite against him. In 1814, a coalition of European nations invaded France. Napoleon's allies abandoned him, and he was forced to abdicate. He was exiled to the island of Elba off the coast of Italy. But Napoleon wasn't done fighting. A year later, he escaped from exile and returned to power in what would become known as the 100 Days War. Scene 10, the final defeat. For 100 days, Napoleon led France once more, but his second attempt at ruling was short-lived. On June 1815, Napoleon and his army faced off against the British, Dutch, German, and Belgian forces at the Battle of Waterloo. It was a decisive defeat for Napoleon, forcing him to flee from France once and for all. He was hunted down and eventually captured, ending his reign for good. Scene 11, exile and death. Napoleon spent his final years in exile on the remote island of St. Helena in the Atlantic Ocean. He lived there in relative comfort, but he was effectively cut off from the world. He spent his time gardening, reading, and writing his memoirs. Napoleon died on May 5, 1821 at the age of 51. An autopsy performed after his death revealed that he had died of stomach cancer. Scene 12, legacy. Despite his controversial legacy, Napoleon's impact on world history is undeniable. His name still echoes in history, a symbol of power, brilliance, ambition, the price of overreaching. What do you think? Let us know in the comments below. Click here to watch one of these next videos and let us know in the comments your ideas for topics that we should cover in the future.